The vindictive ghost looked like a flying scrapyard, and that was on her good days. Captain Kira Voss ran her scarred fingers along the bulkhead as she made her morning rounds, feeling the ship's irregular vibrations through the patched hull plating. Coffee-brown stains from decades of jury-rigged repairs painted abstract patterns across every surface. The ship's original white paint had long since faded to the color of old bones, and whole sections had been replaced with salvaged metal from a dozen different vessels. To anyone with functioning eyes, she was exactly what the hegemony called her, a rust bucket. "Captain," came the gravelly voice of her chief engineer, Dex Cronin, emerging from behind a tangle of rewired conduits. His cybernetic left arm sparked occasionally, another patch job that worked better than it looked. The hegemony fleet just dropped out of hyperspace. 12 vessels, including 3 of their new Dominator-class dreadnoughts. Voss nodded, unsurprised. The Vectar hegemony had been hunting her for 3 years now, ever since she'd liberated an entire slave colony from their mining operation on Kepler 442b. What had started as a simple rescue mission had escalated into something the hegemony couldn't ignore. A human captain making them look like fools across 3 star systems. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies," added her communications officer, Naya Torvin, her violet eyes reflecting the amber glow of her console. Half human, half Altarian, she joined Voss's crew after the hegemony had glassed her homeworld for the crime of excessive independence. "Admiral Keth Cole wants to discuss terms." "Put him through." The view screen flickered to life, revealing the angular, chitinous features of a Vectar military commander. Admiral Keth Cole's mandibles clicked in what Voss had learned was their equivalent of a condescending smile. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship gleamed with polished metal and holographic displays, everything the vindictive ghost wasn't. "Captain Voss," Keth Cole's translator rendered his chittering speech into cold, mechanical tones. 3 years of this amusing chase must end. Surrender now, and your crew will be granted swift executions rather than the prolonged entertainment my soldiers typically enjoy. "Generous," Voss replied, settling into her command chair, a salvaged piece of furniture that had once belonged to a luxury yacht. "But I've got a counteroffer. You are in no position to negotiate. Your pathetic vessel is outnumbered 12-1 by the finest ships in the hegemony fleet. Our Dominator-class dreadnoughts alone carry more firepower than your entire ship masses." Voss glanced at her tactical officer, Marcus Pike, whose mechanical eye whirred as it interfaced with the ship's targeting systems. The man had lost half his face in a hegemony raid on a civilian transport, and the crude cybernetics that replaced his organic parts gave him a perpetually angry expression. He nodded once. The fleet was in position. "Here's the thing about humans, Admiral," Voss said, standing slowly. "We don't just fight with what we have. We fight with what we can make, steal, or improvise. And we've had 3 years to prepare for this conversation. Your bravado is... Tell me, Admiral, how many human ships has your glorious fleet actually destroyed?" Keth Cole's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "Your meaning? In 3 years of chasing us, how many confirmed kills has the mighty hegemony scored against human vessels? Not transports. Not civilian craft. Actual warships crewed by humans who wanted to fight." The silence stretched for several seconds. Voss could see the realization dawning in the alien's compound eyes. "0, she continued. "Because every time you've cornered a human ship, something unexpected happened. Equipment malfunctioned. Your perfect battle plans fell apart. Ships you thought were destroyed kept firing until the very end, taking 2 or 3 of yours with them. Impossible. Our technology is superior. Our ships are built by engineers who've never been desperate enough to make a hyperdrive out of washing machine parts and pure stubbornness." Voss smiled, the expression cold enough to freeze helium. "Crewed by soldiers who've never had to choose between eating and keeping life support running. Your vessel is antiquated junk held together by 3 years of modifications you can't see on your sensors. By weapon systems that don't appear on any schematic because we built them from scratch. By a crew that's been waiting for this moment since the day you murdered their families." Keth Cole's chittering took on an edge of uncertainty. "You cannot possibly believe." "I don't believe anything, Admiral." "I know. See, while you've been hunting us across 3 systems, we've been learning everything about your ships. Their weaknesses. Their blind spots. The 17 different ways to turn a Dominator-class dreadnought into a very expensive fireworks display. This is absurd. Even if your claims were true, you are still outnumbered 12-1. 12-1. Voss's smile widened. "Admiral, you've made a critical error in your mathematics." She nodded to Pike, who activated the ship's long-range sensors. The display filled with new contacts, dozens of them, emerging from the asteroid field where they'd been running silent. 12 hegemony ships, Voss said conversationally, versus 43 human vessels. Miners, merchants, salvage crews, and a few military ships that officially don't exist. All of them with crews who have very personal reasons to see you dead. The color drained from Keth Cole's chitinous features as he realized that his hunters had become the hunted. Admiral Keth Cole's mandibles clicked rapidly as his sensors officer reported what they were seeing. Impossible. Our intelligence indicated only the one vessel. Where did these ships come from? 3 years of recruiting, Voss replied, her voice carrying across the comm channel with casual confidence. Turns out, when you spend decades enslaving and butchering civilians, you create a lot of people with nothing left to lose. The hegemony fleet began to shift formation, their elegant wedge configuration dissolving into a defensive sphere. But Voss could see the uncertainty in their movements. They'd expected to face a single desperate smuggler, not a coordinated fleet of angry humans. All vessels, this is Vindictive Ghost, Voss broadcast on the human fleet frequency. Commence Operation Reckoning. Remember, no prisoners. No mercy. They wouldn't show any to your families. The response came from 43 different ships and 43 different voices, but the message was universal. Understood, Captain. For the dead. The first shots came from the hegemony fleet, massive particle beams designed to vaporize anything they touched. The Gloriana's Revenge, a converted or hauler, took a direct hit to her starboard side. The beam punched through her hull plating like tissue paper, venting atmosphere and bodies into space. But the Gloriana didn't die quietly. Captain Yuki Nakamura, a former mining engineer who'd lost her entire family on Kepler 442b, rerouted her ship's reactor output directly to the engines. The Gloriana accelerated beyond her safety limits, closing the distance to the hegemony destroyer Blade of Dominion in seconds. Tell my family I kept my promise, Nakamura broadcast on all frequencies, then rammed her ship into the destroyer's bridge section at 17% light speed. The explosion lit up the void like a newborn star. When the radiation cleared, both ships were gone, leaving only expanding clouds of superheated plasma and twisted metal. First blood to us, Pike reported, his mechanical eye tracking the battle data. But they're adapting fast. The hegemony fleet had abandoned their standard tactics, forming into smaller, more maneuverable groups. 3 destroyers peeled off to engage the human left flank, their synchronized fire cutting through the converted civilian ships like a scythe through wheat. The Proud Mary, a salvage vessel crewed by refugees from a dozen different worlds, exploded in a cascade of secondary detonations. Her captain, an elderly Terran named Bootleg Pete, managed to launch his ship's entire complement of mining charges before dying, improvised weapons that tracked the destroyer's heat signatures and detonated against their hulls in flowers of flame. Damage to enemy vessels minimal, Torvin reported. Their armor is too thick for our improvised munitions to penetrate effectively. Then we don't fight their armor, Voss replied. She opened a fleet-wide channel. All vessels pattern Omega. Target their sensor arrays and communication equipment. Make them deaf and blind. The human fleet scattered like startled birds, each ship following a different attack vector. The inevitable consequence, a former luxury yacht converted into a missile platform, launched a spread of jury-rigged torpedoes at the hegemony flagship's sensor dome. The warheads had been cobbled together from mining explosives and guidance systems pulled from agricultural drones, but they flew true. The explosions were small, barely enough to scratch the dreadnought's main armor, but they obliterated the delicate sensor equipment. Similar attacks struck the other hegemony vessels, leaving them partially blind and struggling to coordinate their responses. Their formation is breaking down, Pike reported. But we're taking heavy casualties. The human fleet had lost 8 ships in the opening minutes of the battle. The Testament, Fury of Kepler, Last Stand, Vengeance Postponed, Broken Chain, Remember Altair, and 2 others, each one carrying crews who'd volunteered for what they knew might be a suicide mission. But their sacrifice had accomplished something crucial. The hegemony fleet was no longer fighting as a unified force. Individual captains were making their own tactical decisions, pursuing targets that seemed vulnerable rather than following a coherent battle plan. Admiral, Voss broadcast on the open channel, you're learning the first rule of fighting humans. We don't play by your rules. Your barbaric tactics only delay the inevitable, Keth Cole responded, though his voice carried less certainty than before. You cannot hope to match our firepower. Firepower? Voss laughed, the sound carrying an edge that made her own crew shiver. "Admiral, we're not trying to match your firepower. We're trying to exceed it." She nodded to Cronin, who activated the Vindictive Ghost's primary modification, a project that had taken 3 years and parts from 17 different ship classes to complete. The ship's hull plating began to retract in sections, revealing what looked like a massive, jury-rigged cannon running along the vessel's entire length. It was a railgun built from salvaged mining equipment, powered by 3 separate reactor cores that Cronin had somehow managed to synchronize despite the fact that they came from different manufacturers and operated on incompatible power systems. "What is that monstrosity?" Kethcole demanded. "That," Voss replied, "is what happens when you give human engineers 3 years, unlimited scrap metal, and a really good reason to be creative." The railgun began to charge, drawing power from every available system on the ship. Life support dimmed to emergency levels. Artificial gravity flickered. The lights went out everywhere except the bridge and engineering. "Cronin, how long until we can fire?" 30 seconds, Captain. But we only get one shot. This thing will drain our entire power grid and probably fry half our systems in the process. Then we'd better make it count. The targeting solution came together on Pike's display, a perfect angle on the Hegemony flagship's reactor core. The Dominion of Vectar was 1.5 kilometers of polished metal and advanced technology, carrying enough firepower to reduce a planet to ash. "All human vessels clear the firing line," Voss ordered. "This is going to get messy." The railgun fired with a sound like reality tearing apart. A projectile the size of a cargo container, accelerated to 30% light speed, crossed the distance between the Vindictive Ghost and the flagship in less than a second. The Hegemony's shields held for exactly 3 nanoseconds. Then the projectile punched through their defensive systems, through their armor, through their hull, and directly into their primary reactor. The Dominion of Vectar didn't just explode, it became a miniature sun, flooding the battlefield with enough radiation to fry unshielded electronics across 3 light minutes of space. When the glare faded, Admiral Kethcole and his flagship were gone. The death of the flagship sent shockwaves through the Hegemony fleet that went far beyond the electromagnetic pulse. For a species that had built their entire military doctrine around technological superiority and coordinated tactics, watching their most advanced warship obliterated by a primitive railgun was like witnessing their gods bleed. But the Vectar were not a species that had conquered half the galaxy by giving up easily. Subadmiral Vexthera, commanding the dreadnought Inevitable Dominion, assumed fleet command with the cold efficiency her species was known for. Her first order was to scatter the remaining ships into independent attack groups. If coordination had failed them, they would rely on individual superiority. "All vessels break formation. Engage at will. Priority targets are the command ships and any vessels showing unusual weapon signatures," she broadcast to the surviving Hegemony fleet. The human fleet had paid a price for their opening victory. The Vindictive Ghost was running on auxiliary power, half her systems offline from the railgun discharge. 7 more human ships had been destroyed in the opening exchange, their crews adding to the growing field of debris and radiation that was turning the local space into a graveyard. "Captain," Torvin reported, her voice tight with concentration as she monitored multiple frequencies, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Rebels' Gambit. Captain Sorrow requests immediate assistance." Voss could see why. The Rebels' Gambit, a converted passenger liner carrying refugees from 3 different worlds, was under attack by 2 Hegemony destroyers. The ship's improvised weapons, mining lasers and civilian-grade shield generators, were no match for military-grade firepower. "Cronin, how long until we can maneuver?" "At least 10 minutes until we have main engines back online," the engineer replied, his cybernetic arm throwing sparks as he rerouted power through damaged conduits. "The railgun discharge fried our primary control systems. 10 minutes was a lifetime in ship-to-ship combat." Voss watched helplessly as the Rebels' Gambit took hit after hit, her hull beginning to buckle under the sustained assault. Captain Elena Sorrow, a former commercial pilot whose crime had been refusing to transport slaves for the Hegemony, transmitted one last message: "All ships, remember, they're not invincible. Make them pay for every meter of space." The Rebels' Gambit exploded in a cascade of secondary detonations, but Sorrow had managed one final act of defiance. She'd overloaded her reactor and used the explosion to launch the ship's entire passenger complement, nearly 200 people, toward the nearest human vessel in escape pods. The Hammer of Justice, a former mining vessel, moved to intercept the pods while under fire from a Hegemony cruiser. Captain Modi Okafor, whose family had died in the glassing of New Lagos, managed to recover most of the survivors before his ship's armor failed. "This is Hammer of Justice," Okafor broadcast as his ship began to break apart. Refugees are away. Give them hell. The pattern was becoming clear and terrifying. The human fleet was trading ships at a rate that couldn't be sustained. For every hegemony vessel destroyed, they were losing 3 or 4 of their own. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. "Captain," Pike said quietly, his mechanical eye calculating casualty reports, "at this rate, we'll be down to a dozen ships within the hour." Voss nodded grimly. She'd known this would be costly, but seeing it play out in real time was harder than she'd anticipated. These weren't just tactical losses. They were friends, allies, people who'd trusted her enough to follow her into what was effectively a suicide mission. "All vessels, this is Vindictive Ghost," she broadcast. "Fall back to position, Charlie. Defensive formation." "Captain," came the voice of Dmitry Volkov from the People's Hammer, a cargo hauler that had been converted into a missile platform. "Respectfully, running won't help us. They're faster than most of our ships." He was right. The human fleet consisted mainly of civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for combat. They were tough, determined, and creative, but they weren't built for extended tactical maneuvers against purpose-built warships. "I'm not suggesting retreat, Dmitry. I'm suggesting we make them come to us." Position Charlie was a dense asteroid field that had been providing cover for the human fleet. But Voss had spent 3 years preparing for this battle, and the asteroids contained more than just hiding places. "Torvin, activate the network." Over the past year, human engineers had been seeding the asteroid field with sensor relays, communication equipment, and other surprises. Now, as the hegemony fleet pursued the retreating humans into the asteroids, they found themselves in an environment that had been thoroughly prepared for their arrival. The first indication that something was wrong came when the hegemony destroyer Claw of Retribution struck what appeared to be a small asteroid. The rock exploded with enough force to cripple the ship's engines. It had been hollowed out and packed with mining explosives, turned into a massive proximity mine. "What is this?" Sub-Admiral Vexthera demanded as her fleet suddenly found itself navigating a field of hidden weapons. "This," Voss replied, "is what happens when humans have time to prepare." More asteroids exploded around the hegemony ships, each detonation calculated to drive them toward specific positions. The human fleet, knowing the safe paths through the field, used their knowledge to stage hit-and-run attacks from unexpected angles. The Iron Maiden, captained by a former asteroid miner named Valentina Cross, emerged from behind a cluster of rocks to launch a spread of improvised torpedoes at the hegemony cruiser Blade of Order. The warheads, originally industrial-grade shaped charges used for mining operations, punched through the cruiser's armor at close range, causing massive internal explosions. But the victory was short-lived. The Blade of Order, even as it died, managed to launch a final salvo that caught the Iron Maiden amidships. Cross and her crew had just enough time to evacuate their reactor core before the ship's ammunition stores detonated. "We're losing ships faster than we can replace them," Pike reported. "Current count, 21 human vessels still operational, 9 hegemony ships remaining." The odds were improving, but the cost was staggering. Over half the human fleet was gone, along with crews that represented the best of humanity's survivors. People who'd refused to surrender, who'd kept fighting even when victory seemed impossible. "Sub-Admiral," came a transmission from one of the hegemony destroyers, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from multiple locations throughout the asteroid field. It appears the humans have prepared additional surprises." Vexthera's mandibles clicked in frustration. Every tactical advantage her forces possessed was being negated by human ingenuity and preparation. It was becoming clear that this battle would not be won through superior technology or firepower. It would be decided by which side was willing to pay the higher price for victory. "All vessels, maintain formation and continue the advance. We will not be deterred by primitive tricks and desperate measures." But as her words echoed through the hegemony fleet, another converted asteroid exploded, sending the cruiser Dominion's Pride tumbling into the path of a waiting human ambush. The mathematics of the battle were shifting, and Vexthera was beginning to understand what her predecessor had learned too late. Humans didn't fight to win by conventional standards. They fought to ensure their enemies lost, regardless of the cost to themselves. Sub-Admiral Vexthera's tactical display painted a picture that no hegemony commander had ever been forced to contemplate. Her technologically superior fleet was being systematically dismantled by converted civilian vessels and improvised weapons. "Sub-Admiral," her sensor officer reported, his voice carrying the stress of the impossible situation. "Long-range scans detect additional human vessels approaching from the outer system. Estimated time to engagement, 47 minutes. Vexthara's compound eyes examined the data. 3 more ships, running silent until now, moving in from different vectors. Not reinforcements, the energy signatures were too small for warships. But humans had already demonstrated that ship class meant nothing when it came to lethality. We end this now, she decided. All vessels, abandon individual engagement protocols. Concentrate fire on the command ship. Destroy the vindictive ghost and their coordination will collapse. It was sound tactical thinking. Unfortunately for the hegemony, human military doctrine had been forged in the crucible of species-wide extinction events. They'd learned to fight without centralized command structures, because centralized command structures were the first things enemies targeted. Captain, Pike reported, his mechanical eye tracking the convergence of hegemony ships toward their position. They're massing for a coordinated strike. All remaining vessels closing to optimal firing range. Let them come, Voss replied. She activated the fleet communication system. All vessels, this is Ghost. Pattern Omega-7. Execute on my mark. The human ships scattered like leaves in a hurricane, each following pre-planned routes that maximized cover while maintaining firing solutions. But 3 vessels, the Retribution's Call, Wages of Sin, and Final Judgment, accelerated directly toward the massing hegemony fleet. Captain Zara al-Rashid of the Retribution's Call had lost her homeworld to hegemony orbital bombardment. Her ship, a former research vessel, had been converted into something that barely qualified as a ship anymore. It was essentially a reactor core with engines and a guidance system. 4 New Damascus, she transmitted, then cut her communication array and diverted all power to acceleration. The hegemony fleet concentrated their fire on the approaching kamikaze vessels, but the humans had anticipated this. The ships were small, fast, and surrounded by clouds of metallic chaff that confused targeting sensors. 2 destroyers worth of firepower focused on the Retribution's Call, overwhelming her crude shields and punching through her hull. But al-Rashid had already committed to her course. Her ship, bleeding atmosphere and structural integrity, continued its death dive into the heart of the hegemony formation. When her reactor finally destabilized, the explosion took 2 destroyers and a cruiser with it, leaving the survivors blinded by electromagnetic interference and scattered by the blast wave. Direct hit on 3 enemy vessels, Pike reported with grim satisfaction. 2 destroyers destroyed, cruiser heavily damaged. The Wages of Sin and Final Judgment used the confusion to close with their own targets. Captain Yuki Sato of the Wages of Sin had been a cargo pilot before the war. Her crime was refusing to transport hegemony weapons to be used against human colonies. She managed to ram her ship into the damaged cruiser's reactor section, the double explosion lighting up the asteroid field. Captain Omar Hassan of the Final Judgment had been a teacher before his school was bombed in a hegemony pacification raid. His ship struck the dreadnought Inevitable Dominion amidships, the explosion ripping a massive hole in the capital ship's hull but failing to destroy it outright. 3 more ships lost, Torvin reported, her voice carefully neutral. But hegemony fleet strength is down to 5 vessels, 2 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and the damaged dreadnought. The tactical situation had reversed. The humans now had 18 ships to the hegemony's 5. But Vexthara was not finished. Emergency protocols, she broadcast to her remaining ships. Activate planetary bombardment weapons. If we cannot win this engagement, we will ensure these humans never threaten the hegemony again. Captain, Torvin said urgently, I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the remaining hegemony vessels. They're charging weapons designed for orbital bombardment, if they fire those into the asteroid field. The implications were clear. Planetary bombardment weapons were designed to crack continents and boil oceans. Used in close quarters, they would obliterate everything within several light seconds, including both fleets. They're going to take us with them, Pike said. No, Voss replied. They're going to try. She opened a channel to the 3 approaching human ships, the reinforcements that had been detected earlier. This is Vindictive Ghost. Report status. This is Captain Rosa Martinez of the Harbinger of Dawn, came the reply. We're 30 minutes out, but we've been monitoring the battle. If you can give us targeting data, we can try a long-range strike. Negative, Harbinger. Too much risk of friendly fire. But I need you to do something else. Voss transmitted a data package to the approaching ships. Detailed scans of the hegemony vessels, their weapon systems, and the tactical situation. If this goes badly, she continued, you jump out immediately and get word to Earth. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that the hegemony's invincible fleet was broken by humans and converted civilian ships. Tell them that we chose to fight. Understood, Ghost. But Captain. No heroics, Martinez. This is bigger than one battle. Humanity needs to know that we can win. The hegemony bombardment weapons were nearly charged. Voss could see the energy readings on her tactical display, enough concentrated firepower to sterilize a small moon. All human vessels, she broadcast, implement final protocol. It's been an honor serving with you all. The final protocol was the last-ditch plan they'd all hoped never to use. Every human ship began overloading their reactor cores simultaneously, turning the entire fleet into a coordinated nuclear minefield. Sub-Admiral, one of the hegemony sensor operators reported, the human vessels are destabilizing their power systems. Energy readings suggest they're attempting mutual destruction. Vexthara's mandibles clicked in what might have been admiration or terror. These humans are insane. They would destroy themselves rather than face defeat. Ma'am, recommend immediate withdrawal. If those reactors detonate simultaneously. No retreat, Vexthara commanded. Fire bombardment weapons. Full spread. And this. The massive energy beams lanced out from the hegemony ships, designed to reduce planets to molten slag. But they were aimed at targets that were no longer where they appeared to be. In the final seconds before the reactor overloads reached critical mass, the human ships had used their last power reserves to alter course, moving their dying vessels to predetermined positions around the hegemony fleet. When the reactors detonated, they created a perfect sphere of nuclear fire with the hegemony ships at its center. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, a brief, brilliant star that burned for exactly 7 seconds before fading to the gentle glow of cooling plasma and scattered atoms. When the radiation cleared, only empty space remained where 2 fleets had fought and died. Except for 3 small ships, running silent at the edge of the system, carrying the story of how the hegemony's finest fleet had been destroyed by humans who refused to surrender. The explosion of the combined human and hegemony fleets created an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that temporarily outshone the system's primary star. But the 3 surviving human ships, Harbinger of Dawn, Eternal Vigil, and Promised Land, had detected something impossible in the moments before the detonation. Captain Martinez, came the voice of Commander Alexei Petrov from the Eternal Vigil. Are you seeing this? Sensor Ghost at bearing 27 Mark IV? Captain Rosa Martinez stared at her tactical display in disbelief. Confirmed Vigil. Single contact, heavily damaged but still under power. Looks like someone survived that inferno. The contact was moving slowly, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. As the radiation from the explosion dissipated, the ship's identity became clear. It was the inevitable Dominion, Sub-Admiral. Vexthara's dreadnought, somehow still intact despite taking the full force of multiple nuclear detonations. How is that possible? Asked Captain Yael Okafor of the Promised Land, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and horror. Nothing should have survived that blast. Vectar dreadnoughts are built to survive planetary bombardment, Martinez replied grimly. Their armor is designed to withstand the kind of forces that could crack a moon. But they can't be in good shape. As if summoned by her words, a transmission crackled through the static-filled space between the ships. Sub-Admiral Vexthara's voice, distorted by damaged communication equipment but still carrying the authority of command. Human vessels, she transmitted. This is Sub-Admiral Vexthara of the Hegemony Fleet. I formally request terms of surrender. The 3 human captains exchanged glances across their respective bridges. In the entire history of human hegemony conflict, no Vectar commander had ever surrendered. They fought to the death as a matter of species honor, preferring mutual annihilation to the shame of defeat. This is Captain Martinez of the Harbinger of Dawn. Sub-Admiral, are you certain you wish to surrender? This is unprecedented in hegemony military doctrine. Captain Martinez, Vexthara replied, her words carefully chosen. My fleet is destroyed. My ship is crippled. My crew is dead except for myself and 7 survivors. I have witnessed something today that changes everything I thought I knew about warfare. The transmission paused, filled with the sound of sparking electronics and failing life support systems. Your species fought with a ferocity and ingenuity that defies tactical analysis. You turned civilian vessels into weapons of war. You used suicide attacks not as desperate measures, but as calculated tactical maneuvers. You sacrificed an entire fleet to prove a point that will resonate across the galaxy. Martinez activated her ship's external cameras, examining the damaged dreadnought. The vessel that had once been a symbol of hegemony technological superiority was now a broken, scarred hulk. Entire sections of armor had been peeled away like flower petals, revealing the twisted metal beneath. Atmosphere vented from dozens of hull breaches, creating a ghostly corona around the dying ship. "Sub-Admiral," Martinez said, "you mentioned that this battle changed your perspective. Explain." "The hegemony has conquered 17 species over the past 3 centuries, Vexthera replied. "In every case, when faced with overwhelming force, they surrendered or were annihilated. Never before have we encountered a species that chose mutual destruction over defeat." Petrov interrupted on a private channel. "Captain, we need to be careful here. This could be a trap. Hegemony tactical doctrine includes false surrender scenarios." Martinez nodded but kept her main communication channel open. "Continue, Sub-Admiral." "Your Captain Voss died believing that her sacrifice would send a message to the galaxy. She was correct, but not in the way she intended. The message is not that humans are warriors. Many species are warriors. The message is that humans are willing to pay any price to defend their principles." The inevitable Dominion shuddered as another internal explosion rippled through its hull. Emergency lighting flickered along its superstructure, casting eerie shadows across the battle-scarred armor. "That is a weapon more powerful than any dreadnought, Captain. A weapon that cannot be countered by superior technology or overwhelming force. The hegemony has built its empire on the assumption that all species will eventually choose survival over principle. Humans have proven that assumption false. So what are you proposing, Sub-Admiral?" "I am proposing that this battle end here, with my formal surrender and my testimony that the hegemony's military doctrine requires fundamental revision. I am proposing that I return to hegemony space with a message: humanity cannot be conquered by conventional means." Okafor's voice crackled over the communication system. "Captain Martinez, I'm detecting multiple new contacts jumping into the system. Bearing 31 Mark 7. They're running hegemony identification codes." Martinez's blood turned to ice water. "How many ships?" 26 vessels. Full Battlefleet configuration. Looks like the hegemony sent backup. The tactical situation had just become impossible. 3 damaged human ships, low on ammunition and fuel, facing a fresh hegemony fleet that had just witnessed the destruction of their predecessors. "Sub-Admiral," Martinez said urgently, "are you aware that additional hegemony forces have just arrived?" "Negative, Captain. My long-range sensors were destroyed in the battle." "How many ships?" 26 vessels. Full fleet. Vexthera's response came after a long pause. "Then we are all dead, Captain. Fleet Admiral Corv Thane does not negotiate. He does not take prisoners. He does not accept surrender. If he has been sent to clean up what he perceives as my failure, he will destroy everything in this system, including my ship and crew. Why would he destroy his own people? Because in his mind we are no longer his people. We are contaminated by defeat. Better to erase all evidence of this engagement than to let word spread that a hegemony fleet was destroyed by converted civilian ships." The approaching fleet was already broadcasting, "All vessels in this system, this is Fleet Admiral Corv Thane of the Hegemony 2nd Battlefleet. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. This includes any surviving vessels from the 1st Battlefleet." Martinez made a decision that would have seemed insane an hour earlier. "Sub-Admiral Vexthera, I'm extending an offer of alliance. Temporary, tactical cooperation against a mutual threat. You would trust a hegemony commander?" "I would trust someone who just watched their entire fleet die fighting mine, and who's about to be executed by their own people for the crime of surviving. The enemy of my enemy is still my enemy under normal circumstances," Vexthera finished. "But these are not normal circumstances. Captain, I accept your proposal." The inevitable Dominion began moving toward the human ships, its damaged engines pushing the massive vessel slowly through space. As it approached, Martinez could see the full extent of the battle damage. The dreadnought looked like it had been torn apart and hastily welded back together. "All human vessels," Martinez broadcast, "we're about to attempt something that's never been tried before. We're going to coordinate with a hegemony vessel against a common enemy. Prepare for joint tactical operations." "Captain," Okafor replied, "with respect, that's insane. How do we know this isn't some elaborate trap? Because if it's a trap, we're all dead anyway. At least this way we go down fighting alongside someone who has as much to lose as we do." The 2nd Battlefleet was closing rapidly, their formation perfect, their weapons charged. 26 ships against 4, 3 human vessels and 1 crippled hegemony dreadnought. "Joint targeting solutions uploading now," Vexthera transmitted. "My weapon systems are damaged but still functional. I can provide heavy fire support if you can provide tactical mobility. Martinez studied the tactical display. It was a desperate plan, but it might work. The approaching hegemony fleet would expect the human ships to flee and the inevitable Dominion to surrender or die quietly. They wouldn't expect coordinated resistance from former enemies. All vessels, attack formation Gamma. Dominion, you're our anvil. We'll be the hammer. The human ships accelerated toward the approaching fleet while the damaged dreadnought positioned itself to provide covering fire. It was a maneuver that should have been impossible. Predator and prey working together against a common threat. Fleet Admiral Corfthane's response was predictably aggressive. All vessels, ignore the human craft. Focus fire on the inevitable Dominion. That ship and crew are hereby declared traitors to the hegemony. The second Battlefleet opened fire with devastating precision. Particle beams and plasma cannons lanced through space toward the damaged dreadnought. But BlackHFY had learned from watching the earlier battle. She used the asteroid field for cover, positioning her ship behind the largest rocks and using them to absorb the incoming fire. Meanwhile, the three human ships used hit-and-run tactics against the hegemony fleet's flanks. The Harbinger of Dawn launched a spread of improvised missiles, cargo containers packed with explosives and fitted with basic guidance systems. They weren't sophisticated, but they forced the enemy ships to maneuver, breaking up their formation. Direct hit on enemy cruiser Blade of Supremacy, Petrov reported from the Eternal Vigil. Minimal damage, but they're falling back to reform. The battle was brutal and chaotic. The Promised Land took a glancing blow from a hegemony destroyer, her hull breached in 3 places. Captain Okafor managed to seal the compartments and continue fighting, but her ship was badly damaged. This is unsustainable, she reported. We're outgunned and outnumbered. We need a miracle. Or we need to be more creative, Martinez replied. She opened a channel to BlackHFY. Sub-Admiral, what do you know about your own fleet's tactical protocols? Everything, Captain. I helped write them. Then you know their weaknesses. Indeed. But exploiting them would require precise timing and coordination that we cannot achieve with our current communication delays. Martinez smiled grimly. Sub-Admiral, I'm going to propose something that violates every rule of space combat. I want to bring my ship alongside yours. Direct physical contact. No communication delays, shared sensor data, coordinated fire control. The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, BlackHFY responded, Captain, that maneuver would leave both our vessels vulnerable. If we're wrong about this alliance, then we die together instead of separately. But if we're right, we become something neither of our species has ever created, a truly integrated warship. Very well, Captain. Prepare for docking maneuvers. The Harbinger of Dawn approached the massive dreadnought carefully, matching velocity and rotation. As the two ships came together, magnetic docking clamps engaged with metallic clangs that echoed through both hulls. For the first time in galactic history, human and Vectar crews were working side by side, their sensor data merged, their weapon systems coordinated, their tactical planning unified. Combined fire solution uploaded, BlackHFY reported. Targeting the second Battlefleet's command ship. Acknowledged. On my mark. The hybrid warship, part human ingenuity, part hegemony technology, unleashed a coordinated barrage that caught Fleet Admiral Corfthane's flagship completely by surprise. The Dominion of Order staggered under the combined assault, its shields overloading and its armor cracking. But the second Battlefleet was far from finished, and the battle was about to become more desperate than anyone imagined.